Have you ever been at an event where things are happening around you and either you weren't old enough or you weren't paying enough attention to realize what was going on? Or have you ever read a book and missed the point, or gone through a class and you're struggling with this class and you take the test at the end and you really didn't do very well because you didn't quite pay attention? Hey, I'm Dr. Rob. This is Biblical Genetics. I'm actually sitting in my happy place right now. I'm on the shores of the Peace River in Arcadia, Florida, a place I have spent many days of my life canoeing, kayaking, camping. The reason that I come here, though, is not because of what you can see. It's not very impressive when you just look at it, even though it's very pretty. The reason I'm here is because of what's underneath the dirt, of the fossils. This is Bone Valley. Central Florida is famous for Ice Age fossils. This is one of the greatest collections of Ice Age fossils anywhere in the world. But you don't know that if you're just paddling on the surface. And I've met multiple people here. I'll be in the river digging stuff up and someone's floating by and say, "Hey, what you doing?" I'm like, "I'm digging for fossils." And they're like, "Fossils? There's fossils here?" It's like, "Oh man, are you kidding me?" So a lot of people just kind of skim over the surface. Well, we don't want to do that here on Biblical Genetics. No, we want to dig. That's where you're watching this, because you want to know more about what the Bible actually says. And you understand that in order to get at that, you have to spend some time. Now, I have found lots of shark teeth, camel teeth, horse teeth, capybara teeth, some fish teeth. I have found fragments of mammoth teeth and mastodon teeth. I have found mammoth rib bones and lots of dugong, or extinct, looks like a manatee with the forked tail instead of round tail, bones. I have found, in fact, right here, I was digging in a hole and I found a toe bone of a mammoth. And on the other side of the river, after 20 people in my group had walked by, I looked down and I realized there's something black in the sand. And I pulled it up and I found a scoot, an armor skin bone from a giant armadillo called a glyptodon. In fact, there were 11 scoots right there in the sand, and all these people had just walked across it. Why did I find it? There's two reasons. One, I spent time looking. I spent a lot of time looking. You can't just walk up to the shore and say, "Oh, I found this world-class fossil." No, you got to spend time digging, a lot of time. But also, I had trained myself to see. By familiarizing myself with the material, when I saw it, I said, "Oh, that's something important." And other people who weren't as familiar literally walked right across it and didn't see it. When we're looking at the Bible, when we're trying to dig and trying to understand and trying to pull things out, we have to spend time studying in order to really know what's going on. And in this series that we're doing here, this is my second in the series on biblical genealogy. These are the things that people usually skim over. I mean, you're reading the Bible and you come to a list of names. Oh, boring. Sometimes you can't pronounce half the names. The names seem to be not connected to anything. It's just lists and lists and lists and lists and lists. And it's like killer when you're in Chronicles or in Genesis or in Deuteronomy. Just what are all these names? Well, the names are there for purpose. I mean, the people who wrote the Bible thought they were important. And granted, some of the names are not important. Some of them are just disconnected. They're just a man, his father, and we don't know how they relate to everything else. But consider that upstream of here, there's a canoe outfitter that I've used many times. And on one trip, we get to the end, and I decided that I just wanted to jump in the river to wash some of the dirt off of me. And while I'm there, I had a mask on, I'm going to look around the bottom. And I just, right off the dock, 6 or 7 feet of water, crystal clear water, I go down there, and I come up with a vertebra of a giant ground sloth. It was just sitting there. Someone had probably picked it up earlier on and then threw it out of their canoe. And so I'm like, this is amazing. I just found this awesome thing. Why did I find it? Well, because I knew what it was and because I had spent a lot of time looking. But it wasn't important. If I hadn't have found it, it would have been no big deal. Maybe someone else would have found it. If no one had found it, it might still be sitting there on the bottom of the river. That's fine. But what that means is that there's still things to find. They're not critically important necessarily, but they're interesting, they're fun, sometimes exciting. When we're reading the Bible, we have to understand there are still things to find. And if we don't find it, well, maybe somebody else will. But why not us? Why not take the time to read, to study, to think, to wrestle with your brain, trying to get your head wrapped around a few things so we can understand the Bible better. Now, in my last episode, I talked about two different types of genealogies. That's lists of names in the Bible. One was the easy one, an ancestor tree. And since it's usually just the father's ancestry, you find lists of father to son to son to son to son to son to son to son, maybe 10 or 11 in a row sometimes. Well, understand, though, that those are written after the fact. It's the end point is writing his genealogy backwards. Those are the easy ones. But they're also in descendant trees, and those are the hard ones. So like the classic one is Genesis chapter 10. Noah, his sons, the grandsons, some of the great-grandsons, and the nations that come from them. It's not straightforward reading. It's really hard because it's you have a person and he has three sons, and they go to the first son, and here's his sons and the grandsons, and by the time you get down a couple levels, you're like, okay, no, wait a bit. Who's this person and where am I? And it's hard. But if you're reading through this and you run into a list of names, because I hope you are reading your Bibles. So if not now, in the future, when you hit one of those banks of names, ask yourself, what type of tree is this? That will help you read it with some understanding. But then we have to ask the question, why are they there? Well, the ultimate reason all that genealogical detail is there is so that we can trace Jesus Christ back to Adam. And that's clear in the New Testament. But the biblical authors didn't know that when they were writing these things, but they thought it was important. They wrote it down. So, okay, some of the names are extraneous. They don't matter. But we don't know that while we're reading it. We have to work through it and figure it out. But a lot of those names are really important. Now, as we're digging, there's something else we have to understand. So, ancestor versus descendant trees is point number one. Point number two is who is being listed? Who's there? What is the genealogy? Whose genealogy is it? Famously, we had a man named Abraham. Abraham is a 10th generation descendant of Noah. And Abraham is living in the Middle East, in the area, probably Syria. Then he moves down into the area of Israel and spends some time in Egypt. But we have Abraham. Abraham has two sons. One is named Ishmael. The other is named Isaac. Now, Ishmael, of course, gives rise to the Ishmaelites. Isaac is going to give rise to the Israelites and the Edomites, but one thing at a time. We have Abraham, we have Ishmael. But Abraham also has a third wife. So Ishmael and Isaac from two different wives. A third wife named Keturah. And she has a bunch of sons, and Abraham sends them to the east, so they live where the Ishmaelites live, because Ishmael also went to the east. And so when we get a generation or two later to the account of Joseph's brothers selling Joseph off into slavery. Now, Joseph is famously going to go down into Egypt. He's going to become a ruler in Egypt. So this is very important for the biblical story. But what is this thing in this point where they're selling Joseph to whom? Well, Ishmaelites and Midianites. And those words are used interchangeably. So he's sold to the Ishmaelites. He's also sold to the Midianites. Later on, when I was sold to the Ishmaelites, when I was sold to the Midianites, and these are two different peoples. Why are they talked about in the same context? Because those are two different sons of Abraham, and they're living in the same area, and the tribes are mixing together. Oh, that's interesting. But then we have, so Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac. Isaac has two sons, two twin sons. One is named Esau, and one is named Jacob. Now, Esau is also famously extremely hairy, so he probably have a hypertrichosis gene, but we don't know that, but he's famously has lots and lots and lots of hair. Esau is going to give rise to a group called the Edomites. Now, why Edom? Because Edom is a nickname for Esau. So he's going to give rise to this people that live south of Israel proper, and they're going to cause all sorts of problems for the Israelites later in the Bible. So during the time of the Judges, a lot of prophecies are named after Edom. Well, if we understand who those people are and where they came from, it helps us say, okay, we have Abraham, we have Isaac, we have Jacob and Esau gives rise to the Edomites, right? Well, Jacob has 12 sons. The 12 sons of Jacob are going to become the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, it's a little more difficult than that because Jacob adopts two of Joseph's sons. Joseph has other sons, but his first two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, are adopted, and they become two of the tribes in Israel. And then one of the tribes out of Levi doesn't get any land. So when you look at a map, there's no plot for Levi, but there's still 12 tribes. All right, but if you keep that kind of stuff straight in your head, it's easier to understand what you're reading. But we have 12 tribes. And from one of those tribes, the priests arise, and from another tribe, the kings arise. In fact, Jacob prophesied over one of his sons, over his son Judah, who did not come from his favorite wife. No, came from his less favorite wife, Leah, the woman he didn't want to marry. But one of Leah's sons was Judah, and from Judah, the kings are going to arise. Now, the two most important families in the Bible is the family of the kings and the family of the priests. Take a guess. When you're reading all the genealogical data, take a guess. Who do you expect is most represented in the genealogies? Yeah, it's the priests and the kings. And yet, the priests, the priestly lineage, we have a lot of genealogical detail, but it doesn't go all the way to the end. Eventually, it kind of gets broken up into pieces. So, in the time of Jesus, we have Caiaphas, the high priest. Okay, so he's in the high priestly family. You can probably piece it together, kinda, but not from the Bible itself. It is claimed that he's a high priest, so everybody knows he's a descendant of Aaron, the brother of Moses. Aaron and Moses are Levites. So everybody knows at that time where Caiaphas came from. But it's not in the Bible. The records aren't there. So if the priestly line is really important, but the records aren't there, what's a genealogy? Most of the genealogical details, and this is actually very important to know, most of the genealogical details are for Judah, but not just anyone in Judah. Most of it is for the kings of Judah. We go from Judah. Judah has sons that go through the Exodus. We have sons that go through the time of the judges. And then we have the first king, King Saul, who's from the tribe of Benjamin. Even though Jacob prophesied over Judah, sorry, I forgot to say this earlier, that the scepter would never depart from Judah. That's weird because there is no king. A scepter is associated with a king. There's no king in Israel. Not during the time that they were in Egypt. Not during the time 40 years of wandering in the desert. Not during the 300 or 400 years of the judges. There's no king. And the first king that arises is not from Judah. It's from Benjamin, King Saul. But God cast him aside and raised up another person, a man after his own heart. King David, the shepherd, the youngest son of a whole bunch of brothers. King David. King Solomon is next. Then Rehoboam is next. And it goes on and on and on throughout for hundreds of years, father to son, to son, to son, to son. There's one interlude there with Queen Athaliah, and she's deposed and she dies, and the next king is actually the son of the last king. So she tried to kill off all the sons, but one of them survived. So there's still a Y chromosome, a family line that goes from King David, starting with Judah to King David, all the way through the kings of Israel, and it ends with Jeconiah. Now, Jeconiah is not the last king of Judah. One of his brothers is, but he's killed. Well, he's taken away after he's blinded to Babylon. But Jeconiah had already been taken to Babylon. He had reigned for 3 months. The Babylonians take him. They throw him in prison for 37 years. But then he is restored. And archaeologically, we know he's restored. And biblically, we know he's restored. He's restored. And then he starts having a bunch of sons. And those sons are listed in Chronicles. Very difficult stuff in Chronicles, but they're there. And they're listed in the Gospel of Matthew. Oh, and the Gospel of Matthew goes to Jesus. Oh, very interesting. So one of the reasons why all the genealogical stuff is there, all that genealogical stuff is there, is so that we can trace the lineage of Jesus. Now, if it wasn't there, it would still be okay. Because people would have known that Jesus was from the tribe of Judah. They would have known he was from Bethlehem. They would have known he was a descendant of King David, just from that. But the Bible gives us extra, so we actually have the name list, which is pretty shocking if you consider it. Almost no one in Israel at that time was able to do what the New Testament authors were able to do for the lineage of Jesus. And nobody after AD 70 is able to do that because the Romans destroyed all the records that were in the temple. So why are the genealogies there? Honestly, it's so we can know the genealogy of Jesus. There's theological reasons why the genealogies are there. And theologically, it's important that all people in the world are descended from Adam, so that Jesus, as a descendant of Adam, can be our kinsman redeemer. Oh, so the genealogies are theological. They're also data-driven, but it takes time to develop an understanding of them. And I did this for years. I know you just read it and you go blah, 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 and you kind of skim real fast until you get to some narrative afterwards where there's some history. But when we skip over the genealogies, we're missing some of the little pearls of wisdom that God scattered in the Bible. And granted, some of the lists are long and hard, and it's hard. Just my humanity doesn't want to read these lists of names. And yet, lately, I've been digging into them a lot. I spent most of last week just looking at the genealogy of Esau, the kings of Edom, Seir the Horite, who's listed in Genesis 36 and 1 Chronicles chapter 1, the chiefs of Edom, trying to figure out what is this? What does this mean? I'll do another episode on Edom some other time. But just understand, if you want to understand the Bible, you have to spend time on target. You have to just get into it and expose yourself to some of the hard stuff. Just like the fossils in this river aren't just come floating to the surface all by themselves. You got to go dig. You have to spend time digging. You have to spend time learning. In fact, going back to the river again, you can't just walk down to the shore and find a fossil. Most places along this river have no fossils. You have to know where to go to find the fossils. So yeah, I found some glyptodon scoots right here on the bank of the river. Just upstream of here, I was on a mammoth dig where we dug down about 15 feet and found two woolly mammoths. About, 50-60% complete, but there's big, huge bones down there. In fact, very strangely, there was a tree lying right across the mammoth bones. The bones were petrified. The tree wasn't. I think it was a palm tree. It was kind of waterlogged and squishy, and you could just rip it apart with your hands. How long has that been sitting there? Because it wasn't decayed. That was weird. So this is Ice Age material, but evolutionists, I don't think the Ice Age is as far ago as you think the Ice Age was. Because there is soft, woody tissue lying on top of petrified mammoth bones. Now, why the bones petrified? Because they absorb phosphates. And the phosphates react with calcium, and you get this black, hard bone. That's why all the fossils are here. This is a post-flood Ice Age deposit. It's amazing. And I now have a day off, and I'm going to spend the rest of the day digging for fossils. This is totally my happy place. I'm going to be praising Jesus the whole time. I'm going to be praying. I'm going to be thinking. I'm going to think about what my next episode is going to be, think about where my next trip's going to be. But I get to rejoice here in God's creation, in the history of the world. The history of the world, partly represented by this river, the history of the world represented by the scriptures. I mean, what better use of my time is that? Christian, get out there and dig. Spend the time in the Word. Figure these things out. Don't just skim over the surface. Absorb it. There is fascinating, amazing, exciting things right there in the Bible that our humanity wants to skip over. But you don't have to. You can learn it. Hey, I'm going to throw in another anecdote here, just as an example of some of the problems in the genealogies. In 1 Chronicles, there's a list of all these kings, all these people that are in Judah, descendants of David, relatives of David, and there's this one guy named Jarha. He's actually an Egyptian. This Judahite man, didn't have any sons, so he let his Egyptian servant marry his daughters, and there's 10 generations listed from Jarha. That's like 300 years. That person is not in the lineage of Jesus, and yet it's sitting in there. Why is he there? Honestly, I don't know. It does tell us that there's lots of intermingling between Israelites and non-Israelites. It tells us that non-Israelites are being incorporated into the tribes. Okay, that's important to know. It's telling us that the racial divisions really don't exist. Okay, I've written and spoken on that before. But when you're going through and you hit one of these name lists, just stop and ask yourself, is it a descendant tree? Is it an ancestor tree? Is it in the lineage of Judah? Is it in the lineage of Jesus? If you ask yourself those 4 questions, you're going to have a much better understanding of what you're reading. So when you run to Jarhan next time, ask yourself, who is this guy? And is he a relative of David and we're listing 300 years more? Or is it an ancestor tree of the last person on the list who is a contemporary of David, and Jarha goes back 300 years into the time of the judges, maybe the time of the Exodus? Ooh, that's a cool question. I'll let you answer that for yourself. But thank you for listening. I really appreciate all of your attention. I hope I've encouraged somebody. I hope I've spurred somebody to dig into the Bible, because there's still things to learn. There's still things that even all the scholars in the world haven't actually wrapped their heads around, and maybe you can help. Maybe you can find out, or you can plow a field that's already been plowed and learn the things that's already been learned. We have to do that. We're going to call ourselves Christians. We better know the Bible. And the only way to know the Bible is to study the Bible. That's all. Thank you for listening again. Thank you for your support. Those people that are on patreon.com, my small but growing list of people, I love you guys. You are awesome. You are getting this show online and helping it to flourish, because I need money to do the website, the video hosting, the camera stuff, and things like that. For those of you that are on buymeacoffee.com, thank you so much for your tips. I really appreciate it. There's other ways to support me, and if you are interested, please do. But the best thing you can do, and I know a lot of other YouTubers say this, a lot of the podcasters say this, the best thing you can do for me, for this show, is to like it, to subscribe, and to share it. Talk it up with other people. This in particular, this series we're doing on biblical genealogies, I hope it's going to be interesting and exciting and informative. And I am going to be, when we get to the genealogy of Jesus, I'm going to be knocking down some sacred cows of skepticism. And I'm going to show that they're wrong, and they've been wrong for a very long time. And there are good answers to some of the biggest skeptical questions about biblical genealogies. But stay tuned. My paper doesn't come out for another 2 months, and I can't talk about it until after that. God bless you all. Have an awesome day.